And welcome back to the Wednesday edition of First News here on the 31st of July. Just about 19 minutes in front of 8 o'clock as we do welcome the CEO and founder of Opportunity Arkansas, Nic Horton. And Nick, welcome back to the show. How are you this morning?
Hey, good morning. I hope your audience isn't tired of hearing my voice.
No.
I feel like
Never.
Spent half the day on the radio there yesterday, but hey, it's good. It's good stuff.
Do you feel like the listeners treated you well yesterday? I heard when I was listening, you had a bunch of phone calls coming in, things like that.
Oh, my gosh.
Felt they treated you well?
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. The second time I've done that show, and I'm just still blown away at the audience and how engaged they are. And, we started talking about tax reform.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, weigh in. Let me know what your favorite taxes to hate or your least favorite taxes are. And I mean, people, it just blew up. Well, the property tax, well, the sales tax, well, the grocery tax. Well,
any word that has tax with it, we're against.
That's right. Well, and the sad part was, I started thinking, well, maybe there's so much feedback because there's so many freaking taxes in Arkansas.
That's right. That's right.
It's a big problem, but no, it was a ton of fun. I mean, they had to pry me out of the studio at 6 o'clock. I just wanted to keep going. It was a blast.
Yeah, no, I would have been very disgruntled if you'd have been here when I got here this morning. That's for sure. So it does bring up this talk of taxes. Last night, the Little Rock Board of Directors voted 8-0 to put the new sales tax, a 1 penny sales tax, onto the ballot in November. You saw the feedback. I've been running a poll this morning on would you vote for the sales tax here in Little Rock. I don't have a single yes yet of coming in. I mean, does this have any chance in November of getting pushed through? It just doesn't seem like with the economy the way it is right now and the state of affairs, like you just said, a lot of taxes going on anyways. Doesn't seem like we're in the mood to vote for a new tax right now.
Well, as a very wise man, my old mentor told me once, several times, predictions are tough to make, especially about the future.
Yeah.
But I will say, to your point, I mean, this does not seem like a very favorable environment for tax increases. You look at the cost of groceries. We talked about that a lot on the show yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Significantly, I mean, just astronomical compared to what it was even just a couple of years ago. And look, I mean, I remember, Toby, a few years ago going to New York City on a work trip and getting my receipt for a meal and looking at it. The tax rate was something like 5.5%.
Yeah.
And I thought, I was floored because I thought, this is like half as much tax as I pay for a meal in Conway, Arkansas, in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Right.
I mean, this is completely insane. So I think, my gut says, no, it won't be successful. I certainly hope it's not, because we're one of the most heavily taxed states in the country.
Yeah.
And we've got to stop. We just got to, at some point, we have to stop doing this to ourselves. Now, I will say just briefly, one more thought on this.
Mm-hmm.
Major kudos to the state legislature and State Representative David Ray, who had been pushing the envelope for years and years and years on special election reform. Because of what I can tell you is, absent special election reform that we got done in the 2023 legislative session, they would probably be putting this on the ballot in September during the week of the fair, when 300 people, which all just happen to be city employees, would go out and vote,
right,
and the thing would pass probably overwhelmingly. So I do think there's a greater chance that it fails because it's going to be at the general election. It's a presidential year. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, you're going to have a lot of people coming out to vote, and it doesn't appear that there's a lot of people in favor of this, even though it would do good things for the city, frankly. I mean, in my opinion, it would do some good things for the city, but it's just there's other ways. You got to get creative is what I always like to say. Well, you got to get creative with how to figure these things out, and it's not taxes.
Then that's the problem. I mean, they always, if you do this, we'll give you this. I mean, if you vote for this tax, we'll renovate the Robinson Center. And I'm looking at the Robinson Center the other day. That was a tax bond issue they passed a few years ago that I was against.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, gosh, it is really nice. It is really great the way it turned out. But they do this sort of, trade negotiation with the taxpayers. And what they don't, what often people don't realize is there were probably other ways to do that. There was probably revenue within the city budget already that could have been used to pay for some of these things. But they want both and. They want all of the above, and they just want more and more and more revenue.
Yeah.
And they're going to try to entice you with all these shiny objects to get you to give them more of their money. And It's just a bad deal.
Well, we prove time and time again, you give more money to them, and then we get mad about how they spend it because we don't find it to be wisely, and so
That's right.
that's what
That's right.
those things turn into. Nick, yesterday you and I were talking before you hit the airwaves on the Schmidt show, and you said that there had been some movement in the abortion case that the state Supreme Court was looking at. What's going on with that case right now? Is it still slated to not be on the ballot in November?
Yeah, as of now, there has been no change in terms of that getting on the ballot, and I think it's still an uphill climb for the other side to prove and justify. They're hoping for a Hail Mary, frankly, that the Supreme Court will save them and try to force this thing on the ballot. But in the last week or so, what we've seen is the Supreme Court ordered the Secretary of State to do a facial count of the volunteer signatures only. There's still this big question of whether or not the paid signatures can be counted.
Right.
I think that's ultimately what this is going to come down to, frankly, is whether or not those can be counted. And based on my reading of state law, I don't think they can. But the Secretary of State went ahead, obviously complied with the Supreme Court ruling, did a facial count, completed it early, and what they found was what they had said from the beginning, which is the petitioners are significantly short of the threshold that they need to get the issue on the ballot. And so now, of course, I think you're going to see this continue to go back and forth in the courts. I believe Attorney General Tim Griffin has now filed a motion to just say, hey, let's just dismiss this and get this out of the way because they clearly fell short. But, the left, unlike conservatives, sometimes they never stop fighting. I mean, they're going to keep pushing this thing and exhausting all of their legal options. I think it's still an uphill climb for them, and everything seems to be not breaking in their favor, but, time will tell.
One last thing on the way out here, Nick. One of the items we got into earlier this week was an incident that happened last week in the Arkansas Republican Party where, some items like closed primaries were voted on at the state convention by the delegates this year, and then the executive committee, the rules committee for the party got together last week. They repealed some of those decisions. What do you make of what's going on there? Is this a fracture in the state's Republican Party, or is this just a case of you didn't follow protocol, or how do you size this up?
Well, that is a loaded question with a lot of different layers. I think certainly it's really unfortunate, frankly, that there are significant fractures in the Republican Party and the conservative movement in Arkansas. I think a lot of that is natural and somewhat to be expected in a supermajority environment where, we talked about this on the show yesterday on the Smith show with Senator Ben Gilmore. The party's grown, the movement's grown. When you're supermajority, you're attracting folks that are independents, that maybe lean left. We've even seen members of the legislature that have flipped parties from Democrat to Republican. I mean, probably close to a dozen or so. And so with that, there comes some natural tension of just disagreements on the way things should be done and policy and everything else. From what I can tell, and I'm not in the middle of that dispute at all. I've tried, frankly, to stay out of the middle of that dispute.
Right.
But it seems like, based on my reading of the rules and what I've seen come out from the state party and their analysis, that the rules were not followed at the convention. And similar to what we're seeing with this abortion amendment, look, rules matter. I mean, rules are there for a reason, and if they're not followed, there has to be some sort of consequence for that. You don't just get to just say, well, we're going to follow the rules that we want, but not the other rules. So it seems like, from what I've heard, there's probably going to be some sort of, court case or something that's going to ultimately come down to try to decide some of that. But I'll say this, I think it's very sad. I think it's a very sad state of affairs of where we are. I don't think anyone, regardless of what side you're on, should take any pleasure in what's going on in the conservative movement right now in Arkansas, because we're divided, and we in many ways we're divided, and we shouldn't be. We should be excited. We've had more conservative victories in the last 18 months than we've had in my entire lifetime.
Yeah.
Think about that.
That says a lot.
Huge progress. And what are we doing? We're just fighting and bickering over who's in charge of the rules of the state party. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So I hope that we will see some unity, especially going into legislative session, we're going to need everybody pulling in the same direction
Yeah.
to get more conservative wins for the people of Arkansas.
Of course, you can see Nic and Opportunity Arkansas's work at opportunityarkansas.org is the website. And, Nic, we always appreciate the time and appreciate you filling in for Brad last night, and appreciate you joining us this morning.